It's time to start writing JavaScript to perform actions for us inside the game. Hey, I'm Ben, and this is Learn Code by Gaming. This is part 2 of the RuneScape botting tutorial. In our first video, we installed Node.js and the RobotJS library, and now we're ready to start building our bot. If you missed anything, I'll have a link to the full tutorial series in the description. So in the last video, I had you write some code just to confirm that the RobotJS library is working for you. Today I'm going to go back to that code and explain more about how it actually works. So the first thing I had you do was import the RobotJS library using this require statement. And require statements allow you to import code from another file, or in this case another package, so that you can use it in this file. Maybe it's best if we just look at the Node.js official documentation on what the require statement does. So in the first paragraph here, it says that the built-in require function is the easiest way to include modules that exist in separate files. The basic functionality of require is that it reads a JavaScript file, it executes the file, and then it proceeds to return the exports object. So inside a library or a package file, you'll see several export statements, like the examples here. And so then by using the require statement, you're able to get access to an object that contains everything that was exported in that library file that you're importing. And back inside our code, we can actually control-click on robot.js if you're using Visual Studio Code. And that'll open up the file that's being imported with that require statement. And you can see in here everything that's being exported so that we can use it back in our file just by referencing the robot object. And then the console.log is sort of the universal print statement for JavaScript. Anything you put in here, as we saw before, is just going to output to our terminal. And then the move mouse line here, we are referencing that robot object, and inside that object, it has a move mouse function. And then that function requires at least two parameters. That's the x and the y coordinates for the position we want to move our mouse to. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, and you'll get more comfortable with it as we use these concepts more. And before we get much further, the first thing I want to do is wrap our code inside of a main function. And this isn't completely required, but it is good practice. So to do that, I'm first going to declare a function. And in JavaScript, we use the keyword function to do that. Next comes the name of the function, and I'm going to call this one main. And then we have two parentheses to indicate that it's a function. And then we have curly brackets. And anything inside of these curly brackets is what is going to be inside of our function. So I'm going to cut this code and paste it inside of main. Then I'm going to fix the tabs on that. And the reason we use functions is it encapsulates a little bit of our code inside of a tiny little nice package. And if you were to run this file now, you would see nothing would actually be output. That's because we've simply declared the function here, and so it's now defined. But because we've never called the function, the code inside of it isn't run. So to call a function, we simply use the name of the function, we add the parentheses, and then a semicolon to end our statement. So now when our code is run, it's first going to import the robot.js object, and it's going to save that to the robot variable. It's then going to define this main function for us. And then finally, when we call this main function, it's going to enter here, and then it's going to run each one of these lines of code. And so it should work just as it did before we created this function. And sure enough, it works. So one of the things that we know we're going to have to do with our bot is we're going to have to move the mouse and then wait a little bit of time and then move our mouse somewhere else. So to do that, we need a sleep function. And a sleep function will pause the execution of our code for a given length of time. Now, most programming languages have a nice, easy way to perform a sleep, but JavaScript doesn't have anything like that. So there are a few different ways to do sleep in JavaScript, and I wanted to keep it as easy for you guys as possible. So I thought maybe importing another library to do sleep would be the best way. And so in doing that research, I found this sleep package. But as I was reading the documentation, it says that if we have Node.js 9.3 or higher, we can actually just use this atomics.wait. And they provide an example of what a sleep function could look like using that instead. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that function. And I've tested this out already, and it does work pretty well. And go ahead and paste that below your main function. And then I'm going to make a couple changes to this function here. I'm going to change the name from msleep to just sleep. I think in this case, m probably stands for milliseconds. So this parameter here that's currently n, I'm just going to change the name of that parameter to ms for milliseconds. So any number of milliseconds we give this sleep function, that's how long it'll wait. And since we changed that parameter, over here where it uses that parameter n, we also need to update that to use ms instead. So now let's test out this new sleep function. Inside the main function, let's go ahead and remove the move mouse call. And instead, let's call sleep. And I'll pass in 2000. 2000 milliseconds will be 2 seconds. So when we run this, what we expect to happen is we expect to see starting in our console, and then 2 seconds later, it should say done, and our code should finish. All right, so that looks like it was 2-second wait time. And you can see how this sleep function is very similar to the main function. We use the function keyword, we give the function a name. In this case, inside the parentheses, we want to add a parameter, and this will allow us to change the number that we want to pass in. That way we can use it like we did up here, sleep 2000 to sleep 2000 seconds, and then we can very easily change that to 4 seconds. And then we can also call that sleep function again later, and we can this time pass in a different value for that parameter, let's say 6 seconds. And then just as before with the main function, when we call the sleep function, we're just going to use the name, the parentheses, and then this time we're going to pass in that parameter. And functions can have multiple parameters. You do that when you're declaring the function. You could just use a comma and then put another variable name here. Just call it test. And then in this case, when I call these functions, I would want to put some other value in for that second parameter. But our sleep function doesn't need any second parameter. The 1 is just fine. So I'll go ahead and remove that. All right, so now let's start up the game. Okay, so once you have your RuneScape private server running, it's going to be very important that we maintain a consistent window size for the game and a consistent position for that window. That's because we'll be dependent on consistent pixel locations as we're developing our code. So what I recommend you do is go to the game settings and the graphics options, and I'm using the resizable option. And then once you have that set, I've just been double clicking on the top bar of the game to maximize it. So that way, if I need to know like where my inventory is, the inventory button is always in the same pixel location on my monitor, and so are the items inside of my inventory. So just in case you've never played RuneScape before, and I'm not a huge RuneScape player myself, I'm going to show you how to get a hatchet so you can start cutting down these trees. So at least on iCob, you can click this book icon over here, and then you can teleport to the cities. And then you'll want to go to Edgeville. And in Edgeville, over here you want to talk to, I believe it's this guy in white. He's the tool store. And in here you'll be able to buy your, what's this, an iron hatchet? And the iron hatchet should be enough to get started. So once you have your hatchet, you'll want to go back to your teleport menu, go back to cities, and you can cut down trees anywhere you like, but where I've been going is just outside of Lumbridge. So that's where I'm going to teleport. So if you go, I guess, just north of the city walls, that's where I'll be cutting down trees. But again, you're welcome to do it anywhere where there's trees in the game. And of course, we can cut down trees just by clicking on them. So now let's write some code to do that click for us. To do that, let's go back to our code, and we're going to be working inside of our main function. And I want to leave this sleep here as our program is starting. And that'll give us enough time so that when we start running our code, we can quickly switch over to the video game window. And then once we've sleeped for 4 seconds, the next thing we want to do is we want to click at a specific location. So to do that, we're going to call robot, and then I'm going to move the mouse first to that location. And I don't know what this location is yet, so I'm just going to put in 0, 0 for now. And then robot.click, or mouse click, and no parameters inside this function. That'll actually perform the click. So how do we figure out where we want to click on the screen? So there's multiple ways to do it. but this is the method I'm going to show you. Say we want to click on this tree here right in front of us. First thing you want to do is click the print screen button on your keyboard, and this will copy a screenshot to your clipboard. And then let's go ahead and open up Paint. And of course, you could use Photoshop or some better program for this too, but I'm figuring everybody has Paint, so I'm going to show you how to do this in Paint. So once we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and click Ctrl-V to paste. And then we can figure out the coordinates we want to click on, first by clicking Select so our whole image isn't selected. And then if we just hover over the tree we want to click on, you'll see in the lower left-hand corner the coordinates for that pixel. So this one is 1115 by 483. So I'm going to type in 1115 by 483. The first item is the x position of the coordinates, and the second one is the y position. So x is left and right, and then y is up and down. So now if I run this code, it's going to give us 4 seconds to switch over to the game window, and then it's going to move the mouse to that location, and then it's going to perform a click, and then it's going to exit the program. So let's go ahead and see if that happens. Hands off the mouse and keyboard while it does that. All right, so it clicked it successfully, but when it clicked in that position, it didn't quite result in the tree being chopped down. And that's fine, that'll happen. This game's a little finicky about where you can hover. So let's try again. We'll try to get the base of this tree perhaps. So I'll take my screenshot, paste it in, hit select. And we think the base of this tree should work out all right. 764 by 557. Run our code, hands off the mouse, and there we can see that it actually did click it, and now it chopped it down. So now what if we wanted to click that same place again and chop down the tree again after it respawns? So to do that, after we click on the screen to chop down the tree, we're first going to want to sleep for a little while it does that chopping. I'll make it 8 seconds, and then we can just copy that same code we had before. And so then it will, again, click in that same location. And I can just copy this sleep and then click behavior multiple times. So now if I run this code, go back to the game, we should see it click, wait those 8 seconds while the chopping's happening. And then if the tree is respawned, when we click again, we'll chop it again. And so we could keep doing this for as many times as we've pasted that code for. In this case, I've pasted it 3 times, so that should be the third and final time that it actually clicks. So this script will simply click in the same spot again and again with a delay between each click. And as you're doing this, it's really important that you don't move your character and you don't rotate the camera at all, because that will change the pixel location of the tree on your screen. And if you're like me, you're probably curious how I knew to use the move mouse and the mouse click functions. So let me go ahead and show you the robot.js documentation. So this can be found at the official website, it's robotjs.io. And if we click on documentation, this getting started page will show you how to install robot.js, which we already did. And then if you go to syntax, this lists out all the different methods, which are functions on the robot.js object, all the different methods that are available for you to call. So we're using the move mouse function. You can see this takes an x and a y argument. And then we're also using the mouse click function, which takes 2 optional arguments. And you know they're optional because of these square brackets here. So when you call mouse click with no arguments provided, it's just going to click the left mouse button, and it's going to do a single click. So it's always a good idea when you're using a new library to go to the documentation and just take a peek at all the different functions and methods provided to you. And that will give you a good idea of what that library is capable of. So for example, in addition to this move mouse function, it also has a move mouse smooth function. And if you take a look at that, it does the same thing. It moves the mouse to X and Y, but it'll do it more human-like. So I imagine it'll take a little bit of time to move from position to position. So if we want to see what that looked like instead, in our code where we have move mouse, let's try move mouse smooth instead. And so when I run this, Wherever my cursor is currently pointed, when this move mouse smooth is called, I expect it to smoothly go to that new location. So there you go. And then to kill my script early there, so I didn't need to sit through the whole thing, I went over to the terminal and I clicked Control-C, and that'll kill your script. And in VS Code, I showed you the trick earlier where you can control-click on robot.js to see what's available there. You can also control-click on the method names themselves, and that will take you to the same file that shows you all the parameters available inside this function and all the different functions available inside of robot.js. And when this file opens, it also opens up all these folders over here on the left, so you can close the node modules folder again just by clicking on it. And you'll notice how the robot.js documentation calls these methods instead of functions. And methods and functions are very similar. The only difference is that a function can be standalone like our main here or sleep, whereas a method is just a function that's attached to an object. So in this case, these functions are attached to the robot object. So method, function, pretty much the same thing, just a slight difference. Okay, so there's one more thing I want to show you in this video. You can imagine if we wanted to do this mouse click, say 100 times, copy and pasting this 100 times would get very tedious. And also if we ever needed to change these coordinates, updating them in 100 different places would also be very tedious. So when you're writing code, if you want to do something over and over again, we have a special tool for that called a loop. So let me show you how to refactor this code to use a while loop instead. So let me close my terminal here so you can see a little better, a little more of my screen. And I'm going to go ahead and delete all those repetitions we have of our code. And so we want to do just these 3 lines of code in a loop. So a while loop begins with the keyword while, and then parentheses. And whatever condition we put inside of these parentheses, as long as that's true, the while loop is going to continue. So we'll come back to that in a second. First, I want to put in the curly brackets. And the curly brackets just wrap around the code that you want to repeat inside of the loop. And I also like to clean up my tabs here to keep everything nice and formatted. Okay, so we need a condition inside this while loop to evaluate, to figure out how long it should continue for. The simplest thing you can do is just put a true or false in here. If I were to put false, it would just skip this loop entirely. But with true, it'll go through this loop over and over again infinitely. And you can see VS Code even realizes it's an infinite loop because it's grayed out the console log down here as it realizes this code can never be reached. So I'll even put a comment here, basic infinite loop. And generally, infinite loops are a very bad idea, but let's go ahead and just do this and see how it works. All right, so our code's starting. I switched over to the game, hand off my mouse. You can see it clicks the tree. It should wait 8 seconds. Then after 8 seconds, it should click again. And now instead of doing this 3 times or 100 times, it's literally going to do it for as long as our script runs. So to get control back over our computer, you need to quickly go over to the code again, into your terminal, and then Control-C, once again, will kill your script. If you're using Notepad and PowerShell, of course, you'll want to go and select PowerShell and not your code when you press Control-C. So what if you did want to do this loop just a set number of times instead of an infinite amount? To do that, the first thing we do is create a variable that will keep track of how many times we've been through the loop. So to do that, we use the var keyword, and then we give the variable a name. I'll call this one number of loops. And then we set it equal to some initial value. So at this point in the code, we've gone through the loop 0 times, so I'll set it equal to 0. And then in our condition, instead of just setting it to true, we'll go ahead and check to see what the value of number of loops is. And if the number of loops is less than, let's say 5. As long as it's less than 5, it'll keep doing this loop, but once it reaches 5, it'll be false, and so it'll continue down to the part of our code down here. And the final thing you need to do whenever you do a while loop like this is you need to actually change the variable that you're checking, or else it's always going to be true, because 0 is always going to be less than 5. So to do that, I'll take number of loops, somewhere inside the while loop, usually either at the top or the bottom. And I can set that equal to the previous number of loops, and then just add 1. So the first time that it goes through this loop, number of loops will be 0, 0 is less than 5. Then it gets down to this code here, and it'll say number of loops, set that equal to 0 plus 1. And so number of loops will now be 1. It'll go back through and test the condition again in our while loop. 1 is still less than 5, so it'll go through again. And it'll do that 5 times until 5 is not less than 5, and it'll exit the loop. And this line down here where we increment number of loops by 1, this is the sort of thing that happens a lot when you're coding. So there's a few handy shortcuts you can use to do this. You can also use the syntax plus equals 1. And this is the exact same thing as the code we just had written. You can also just do plus plus after a variable name, and this will also just increment by 1. And one of the reasons we have that previous syntax I showed you, the plus equals, is because we can increment using this by more than 1. For example, we can increment by 2 instead. So you can continue to use the code like this if you'd like. It's also common practice to just use the letter I for this variable name. I in this case is for iterator. So you'll see code that looks like this a lot. But I think what I'm going to do for the rest of this tutorial is just set this back to an infinite loop, just to keep the code smaller, and I'll continue to use the Control-C trick to stop my code, which also means that this done statement will never be reached, so I'll just go ahead and delete that. So that's where I'm going to pause for this video. We've covered a lot here if you're new to programming. The key concepts we've discussed are variables, functions, both declaring and calling, methods, and while loops. If you're still unclear on any of these topics, it'd be a good idea to spend a little bit of time to read more about them. I'll leave some links in the description. But congratulations on doing your first bit of GUI automation with JavaScript. I know clicking over and over again in one spot isn't super useful or exciting. So in the next video, we'll be chopping down multiple trees. We'll automate the process of dropping logs from your inventory. And we'll start doing some basic computer vision to find the next tree to chop using the screen functions in robot.js. If you're stuck on anything, or if I messed something up, let me know in the comments and we'll get it figured out. And when you're ready, I'll see you in part 3.